What a beautiful Saturday it is to be with you in the Doctor to Doctor chat room, and so glad to have you here with me. I'm always delighted to share this hour with you. I want to take a moment before we get started to extend my sincere thanks to you for your support. Listen to this. For almost 4 years, we are gearing up for 4 years at this. And all I can say is, had it not been for the Lord who was on my side, God has truly blessed me. And I want to publicly thank Him for keeping and sustaining me throughout this journey. And I want to thank you for coming along this journey. A lot goes into making this happen every week. And sometimes it feels a bit overwhelming, but God is always keeping me and sustaining me, and I want to say thank you. I want to send a hearty thank you to Shaw's Broadcasting for allowing me to have space on this platform to share with you every week. It's been a beautiful journey, and I look forward to more Saturdays that we can spend this time together. Um, Now that I've gotten that out of the way, as I always say, please take good care of yourselves. The COVID numbers are rising, they're on the rise again. So be aware of that and do whatever you need to do to make sure that you are staying safe. However, it's not just about COVID. Make sure that you are taking care of yourselves physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. Okay. Which is a great segue, I'll say, into our topic for today. This is September, and we're in the last day. It is Suicide Awareness Month, and we want to shed light on the prevalence of suicide deaths in the United States, while at the same time, we want to show how we can create positive change and offer support to those that struggle with suicide ideation. Okay. The CDC reports that suicide deaths increased in 2022, rising from 48,183 deaths in 2021 to an estimated 49,449 deaths in 2022. That's an increase of about 2.6%. We do not have the 2023 data as of yet. 9 in 10 Americans, according to the CDC, believe America is facing a mental health crisis. The new suicide death data reported by the CDC illustrates why. One life lost to suicide is one too many, yet too many people still believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness. And we want to change that. The National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention and the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline suggest 5 steps to help safeguard people from the risk of suicide and support them when they're in crisis. Step number one, simply ask. Asking a person does not increase the risk for suicide. So if you think somebody is struggling, just simply ask them, are you thinking about harming yourself? Number two, help keep them safe. If you believe that someone is struggling with the suicide ideation, then make sure that you stay close and connected and try to do what you can to keep them safe. Be there, be connected. Make sure that you are staying connected with that person and then help them connect. Again, the 9888 Lifeline. We've got 911 for medical emergencies. Well, we have 988 when we think someone is in a mental health crisis. Follow up. Make sure that if you've talked to someone and they said they were struggling, don't forget to follow up, check on them, stay close to them, okay? Roughly 500,000 people will attempt suicide each year. 500,000. Females are more likely to attempt, however, males are more likely to be successful in completing suicide. We're gonna talk about this today. I have a very special guest. She's been here before, and we've talked about mental health in many other aspects. But today we're going to focus in on suicide, and we're going to even talk about suicide from a faith perspective. Dr. Sarita Wilson Anderson. She is an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal A.M.E. Church and serves as an associate minister at the St. Andrew A.M.E. Church in Memphis, Tennessee. She is a board certified chaplain, pediatric chaplain, and a certified grief counselor. She serves as director of spiritual care with Bonheur Children's Hospital in Memphis, and her work in chaplaincy has afforded her the opportunity to serve as a consultative resource to the greater Memphis community on grief, resiliency, training, cultural competencies, and other spiritual care related issues. She is the founder and the director of Dance the Word Ministries, a unique combination of liturgical dance and therapy for self-report mood disorders, specifically designed for African American women. And she's awesome, I tell you. Dr. Sarita focuses on self-care from a spiritual perspective and is a proponent rather of eradicating the stigma associated with mental health in the African American community. She has a heart for their journeying with clergy and women as they face the complexities of life. Her mission is to restore hope and bring healing to all. She received her EDD from Argosy University, her her Master's of Divinity, rather, from Payne Theological Seminary in Wilberforce, Ohio, and her BA in Broadcast Productions from Howard University. She is the mother of two daughters and a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And we are so honored to have her back in the Doctor to Doctor chat room here with us today. Welcome back to the show, my friend. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
I am doing very well. I tell you, I have to say before we move forward, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
on matrimony. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm still trying to get used to it myself.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
so
yeah.
happy for you.
Thank you.
Um, I tell you, I each time you come on the show, you're so informative. I appreciate you coming back to share with the audience. September is Suicide Awareness Month,
Mm-hmm.
and we talk about mental health, mental illness a lot
Yeah.
on the show. And you've even been here a couple of times to share on that,
Yeah.
and on that particular topic. But we wanted to talk about suicide and maybe tap into suicide from a faith perspective, because
Absolutely.
when a celebrity dies of suicide, there are questions
Mm-hmm.
about how did they do it, why did they do it, why nobody saw it coming. But if someone of a Christian faith uh, attempts or complete suicide, then there's a focus on, what happened? I thought they were a Christian. How could this happen to
Mm-hmm.
someone that's a
Mm-hmm.
believer? But in fact, faith
Mm-hmm.
and suicidal ideation, they can live side by side in a person's
We
mind,
can live.
you know,
Absolutely.
particularly a
Absolutely.
person that's struggling with some type of disorder, mental
Mm-hmm.
disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just when you deal with any type of mental health illness, mental health concerns, mental health diagnoses, we're Christian, but we are not exempt from being
Mm.
human. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just because we are human and we have faith does not mean that certain types of diagnoses, situations don't impact us and don't
Mm-hmm.
impact our ability to feel and be as human as possible. And so, when we
Yeah.
talk about, you know, the suicidal ideation, dying by suicide, completing suicide, we're not exempt because we're Christian. And I think that's the fault of the church and the body of Christ, that we
Mm.
for so long have ignored mental health, and we've tried to pray it away uh, instead of dealing and addressing the symptoms, the signs, instead of
Mm-hmm.
and really dealing with these things from a Christian perspective, but also from a mental health perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
until we, as the body of Christ, can embrace that, we can't pray it all away. And sometimes we need therapy, and sometimes we need medication, and sometimes we need to go to counseling and talk to somebody. And sometimes we have some very deep rooted concerns and issues. Until we, as the body of Christ, universally Christians embrace that, we're going to always see some level of suicidal behavior in our community.
I just read a statistic before you came on that there are like 500,000
Mm,
attempts of suicide in the US each year.
mm-hmm,
And I
mm-hmm,
find that to be very alarming. And
mm-hmm.
I'm finding more and more on the show, no matter what the topic is, right? It could be about domestic violence, it could be about trafficking, it could be about any array of things.
Yeah.
And more of my guests are bringing up the fact of the church
Mm,
and how the
mm,
church needs to be more involved, from a communal perspective.
yeah.
And yeah, and really supporting and addressing what's happening within our communities. We got to go back to the that civil rights movement feel when the
Yeah.
church was at the heart of it all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You said two very key things. One is community. You know,
Mm-hmm.
in our generation, when you and I grew up, we were raised by a village. We were raised by a community.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've gotten away from that, and it's disheartening
Mm-hmm.
because we're in a generation now where you can't say anything to other people's children, and you're scared to say something, or you're afraid to approach people, and you're afraid. Nobody wants anybody in their business, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it took all of that. It took the neighbors and aunties and uncles and Miss So and
Mm-hmm.
so down the street helping to raise us, to keep us,
Yeah,
kind of connected,
in
and to keep
line.
us in line. Absolutely. In line, and to also let our parents know, hey, I saw this behavior. And even with
Mm-hmm.
teachers can't say anything to parents anymore. And even with
Yeah.
that, I see this behavior, I'm detecting. No, and now, if you, instead of embracing it and saying, well, let me see what I can do to help, but what resources do you have to offer me to help, we're saying, well, that's not my child. My child would never do anything like that. And
Yeah.
even as adults, we're still saying that. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and the other piece you said was, the church did used to be the pillar of our community. It was the core,
Mm-hmm.
it was the center, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not like it used to be.
Right.
People went to the pastor for everything, and that was good. On one hand, it had its pros and cons. It was good
Mm-hmm.
that people went to a faith-based centricity for a lot of things, but also we developed the stigma that the pastor can pray it away. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's that dichotomy that we've got to address. Yes, is we
Mm-hmm.
do need our faith-based centers. We do need to have something that keeps us rooted and grounded. For people who um, don't complete suicide, it's usually their faith that pulls them back in and gets them leveled off, and feeling like there is a purpose to live. But
Mm-hmm.
also, um, so we do need that faith, but we also, it's both and, but we also have to realize we can't pray it away, we can't hope it away,
Mm-hmm.
we have to deal with it. We have got to
Yeah.
deal. And suicide is the symptom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dying, suicidal ideations and dying by suicide, completing by suicide, are the symptoms of a larger root issue. And unless we tap in and help get people the help at the root, then we'll
Mm-hmm.
continue to see these types of numbers escalate.
How do you think we move the church in that direction? How do we get more of our practitioners, our petition, petitioners
Yeah,
to
practitioners.
to, to see that mental health, addressing mental health is important. Because see, I also remember a time when people relied on their faith for medical issues.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna trust God.
Mhm.
And I think somewhere along the line somebody started pushing the, faith without works is dead. And we started to get more in a wellness phase, a physical wellness phase
Mhm,
of,
mhm.
exercising and eating right and all of that. So how do we move to the place where we are starting to take care of our mental wellness
That's a
from
good
from the
question.
church?
From the church, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a two-pronged approach. One is that the way to break the stigma is to address it from the top. So people in faith-based communities respect pastors, respect bishops, respect elders, respect the head of the church. And so it's got to start there, and it's got to start from the pulpit. whether it's sermons, whether it's community health fairs, whatever it is, we've got to preach it. We've got to incorporate it into our preaching. When people come to the pastors for problems and concerns and prayers, pastors have to get trained or become more skilled in
Mm,
assessing those things so that they can refer them out to get the appropriate help, to the
mhm,
appropriate mental health resources. And then the mental health community also, especially here in the South, realizing that this is a Bible belt. We are a faith-based community. We are a
mhm,
faith-based people. They have to
mhm,
realize how important faith is to some of their clients. And so the
mhm,
two have to marry. I don't think we can do one without the other. Practitioners
mhm,
and clergy have to partner in this. The community
mhm,
has to partner in this, in eradicating and breaking the stigma, so that we're hearing it from the church in the pulpit, and we are hearing it when we go to community health fairs, and we're hearing it when we go to therapy, and we're hearing it at our internal an internist or our family practice
mhm,
physician. We're
mhm,
hearing it when we go to the OBGYN. So it surrounds us. And then we have resources, in our places of employment. So all those things, I think, have to collaborate. But the connection between faith and health, or faith and community, or faith and mental health is real. And we have to
mhm,
really hone in on those partnerships and deepen them so that we
mhm,
can meet the needs of the people
mhm.
full, holistically.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's to the point where, when you go to the doctor, you're just your regular MD now.
Mm-hmm.
When you fill out the form about history, medical history, and all of that, you also answer questions about your mental health now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, like, that's where we are. Like, the statistics that I read at the beginning of the show were from the CDC, and they just talked about
Mm-hmm.
how we're really in a crisis, a mental health
Yeah.
crisis now. And
Mm-hmm.
it seemed it took the pandemic to pull back the covers, right? And for people to really shed light on it.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's not when it started in my mind. That's just when we started to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's always been here. It's nothing new. We are just,
Mhm.
there's much more awareness about it. I think social
Mhm.
media has a big piece in
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
also think that the pandemic, as you said, pulled the covers off of what had been not lying dormant, just covered up,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
just kind of avoided. And
Mhm.
I think I always refer to the movie The Color Purple. And
Mhm.
I think all of us had some family member that was kind of like, I think his name was Uncle Joe, and they kept him
Yeah.
back in the room, and they would
Yeah.
slide the tray back and forth
Oh,
to
yeah.
him, and all
Oh,
of
yeah.
that. That's the epitome of mental health. That's how we
Mhm.
treated it. We
Mhm.
just put them off in the room and closed the door and just said they were
Mhm.
crazy. And
Mhm.
that did our families and our community a huge disservice. So it's very prevalent, and I think that you are exactly right. It's nothing new. It's just there's so much more of an awareness, and I think the pandemic let us know that all of us are susceptible to it. All of us are vulnerable by it, and any life event can create a crisis, a mental health crisis in all of us. So we may not always have a diagnosis. We may not all have mental health diagnoses, but we all have mental health concerns. We saw during the pandemic that anxiety and depression can become very real, especially when we
Mhm.
feel isolated, when we feel alone. We get
Mhm.
alone in our own thoughts, and a lot of
Mhm.
that can make people spiral down. And so recognizing and owning the fact that this is nothing new, it's just so much more heightened. There's so much more awareness, and it's happening to people who always said, "Oh, that could never happen to me."
Yes.
And so that's where we are now. That could never happen to me. That would never happen in my family, and that would never happen in my child. And what the pandemic did was show us that each and every one of us can be um, can be susceptible to life-threatening diseases like COVID,
Mhm.
can be susceptible to mental illness and mental health concerns. And so
Mhm.
we see those very, very prominently now. Yeah.
That quickly, we're at break. Guys, we will be right back with Dr. Sarita Anderson in a moment on Doctor to Doctor in the chat room on 94.7 FM. We are still here on 94.7 FM on Doctor to Doctor in the chat room with Dr. Sarita Wilson Anderson.
Mhm.
We're talking about suicide ideation from a faith perspective. We talk about it a lot on the show, and we talk about it from more of a clinical perspective. But today, um, and this being a gospel platform radio station, we wanted to talk about it from a faith perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you said before we went to break, and you were talking about, yeah, this is nothing new, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important to point out that it's just like anything else in life, right? There, in terms of mental illness,
Yes.
I can have, kidney disease and need to be on dialysis. You can have, be in stage one of kidney disease and something else is being done. Maybe you're just being told to drink more water.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Mm-hmm.
different phases and levels of mental illness. And so somebody that's, clinically and clinically depressed
Mm-hmm.
may be challenged with the thoughts of suicide and feeling like, not worthy,
Mm-hmm.
feeling broken, and you can feel broken at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
This whole idea is like we have different, the whole thing is about we have different needs, right?
Yes.
And we talk all the time when we make this comparison and this analogy about, just like you take care of your heart, just like you
Mm-hmm.
take care of your body, and in other ways, we have to be more aware and conscientious about taking care of our minds.
Mm-hmm.
Because I tell you, the mind really does drive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
drives. It's that driving force behind everything else kind of that goes on in our lives. And when you're not feeling well mentally, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to feel well physically.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
like how Joyce Meyer put it, the battlefield of the mind, because
Mm-hmm.
it truly can be a battlefield. Overthinking or thinking through your thoughts racing, all kinds of images and words going through of your mind that may or may
Mm-hmm.
not be correct, but other people have put in your mind, or what you believe about yourself, your self-esteem, experience,
Mm-hmm.
exposure, all of those things go into the thoughts that we have about life, about our purpose, about finding meaning, about why we are here, about the lack of joy we may have or not have. And so you're right. And taking care of ourselves is a big part of that. And being around people, we talked about the village earlier, who help us take care of ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
having people who love us enough to say, you don't seem like you feel that well today. What's happening? What are you thinking? What's going on with
Mm-hmm.
you? And it's
Mm-hmm.
not what's wrong with you, it's what's happening with you, what happened to
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
That because everybody has a story and everybody has a narrative, and no matter how we were raised, no matter what our parents may or may not have instilled in us or taught us, we all have our own experiences from childhood on that inform how we think about ourselves, how we behave, our thoughts, our actions. And all of that goes into our mental health and well-being. And so recognizing signs and symptoms become really important, and knowing when we don't feel at our best, and when those thoughts are taking us or escalating to a place of being very unhealthy, that we need to do something about it. And that is
You
self-care.
You mentioned social media earlier
Mm-hmm.
in another aspect, but I was just thinking as you were talking, I've seen people post on social media, I want to die.
Mm.
I don't want to be here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And people comment with things like, I'm praying for you. And and every now and then I'll see somebody comment, hey, here's my number, call me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or I'm calling you right now. Like,
Absolutely.
if it's somebody
Yeah.
that knows them and has access to them, I talked about that when I was opening the show. Like, we gotta ask people. Like, even in church, when you
Mm-hmm.
notice something different about somebody, ask them, "Are you okay? Do you need to talk?" It's okay to ask.
It's okay to ask. And I think we have to take compassion to another level. We can have empathy and feel sad for people, or say, "Oh, I'm praying for you," but are we
Mm-hmm.
really praying for people? When we go on social media and
Mm,
we say, "I'm praying for you," or we put praying hands, let's take that up step. Let's not take that up a notch. Let's do that. Let's really pray for people. And if we really are concerned about their well-being, we won't say, "Here's my number, call me." We will pick up the phone and call them.
mm,
Like you said, some people do. We and even if we can't help, listening is a big part of it, because people feel misheard or misunderstood, or just need to
Yeah.
talk and get it out and communicate. And people need to know that they are loved, that they are valued, that they have worth, that they have meaning, that they have purpose. All of those things matter when a person is at a pivotal life changing or life making a decision that can be life altering, life changing, or life ending. And so
Mm-hmm.
we've got to be mindful of those things. And, that's nothing to play with. We can't just blow it off, be like, oh, they post that all the time, they'll be fine. Because all it
Yeah,
takes is that one time.
that's
All it
right.
takes is that one time. And they may or may not be here with us again. So we've got to take those things very, very seriously. If you have to, you call mobile crisis, or you call the authorities, or you call
Mm-hmm.
someone in their family if you can't get to them. But you
Mm-hmm.
reach out and you get to people as quickly as possible with love.
Yeah. You made a point early on that no one's exempt. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even the clergy, even people, women and men of the cloth,
Mm-hmm.
have attempted and completed
Mm-hmm.
suicide.
Yeah. It rocked the church community a couple of years ago, where fairly prominent African American male clergy member died by suicide. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he was a pastor of a very prominent, growing church, very affluent in
Mm-hmm.
his area.
Mm-hmm.
And that, if nothing else, should have heightened and alerted all of us that this thing is real. And,
Mm-hmm.
we can pray, we can preach, we can teach, we can lit, but we are still human. And sometimes there are things that, because I think, because clergy are expected to be so perfect and so above par human, to not have all these life emotions and things going on, things with our spouses, things with our own children. The pressure of
Mm-hmm.
clergy is horrendous and heavy. And if clergy feels like they don't have an outlet, sometimes they feel like that's the last resort. And that's what
Listen,
happens
I
because
can't
the
even
church.
imagine the
Yeah,
heaviness of
yeah,
it because it's heavy as a PK.
yeah. And
That's
so what
heavy. So
it's
when I
heavy.
think about the pastor, when I think about the preacher, when the man or woman of God, I can't even
Yeah.
fathom.
You mentioned earlier about where do we start and how the clergy. I think one is that clergy have to deal with their own mental health concerns.
Oh,
Clergy has to
wow.
own and deal with their own mental health and make sure. I always say, and I think you've probably heard me say this before, every pastor needs a pastor, every counselor needs a counselor.
Yep.
No matter what, senior pastor of the biggest church in the world still needs someone to be able to go and talk to, and unload and kind of process through everything that they are going through personally and professionally, and as clergy members. And I think
Mm-hmm.
clergy have to start with dealing with their own mental health. See a counselor. You're a pastor, but
Mm-hmm.
see a counselor. You're a
Mm-hmm.
preacher, but see a counselor. You're an evangelist, but see a counselor. And I
Mm-hmm.
always tell clergy, once a year at least, you go to the eye doctor twice a year. Once a year, you go to the
Mm-hmm.
dentist twice a year. Go get a mental health checkup at least once a year.
Mm-hmm.
Because you carry a lot of, we carry a lot of weight. We carry a lot of things for a lot of people. We have a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of pressure to always preach, always be on, always be available, always be accessible. So we got to deal with our own mental health of what that looks like. And two, recognizing that we are not machines as clergy, and we are human, and we can't do it all the time. And to take some of that weight and pressure off of ourselves with good self-care for ourselves, we have to do it as clergy first before, and then model it for our congregations and the community. And until we can address and deal with that, then we're going to still see clergy having mental health concerns and having suicidal ideation and dying or completing by suicide. We have to deal with our own mental health.
Mm-hmm. And what kinds of things, being in the ministry, what kinds of things were discussed around that particular um, incident with the pastor, prominent
I'm
pastor?
Yeah, I'm not certain exactly what came out, other than a lot of pressure from the church.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of speculation about what was going on in his household. I'm not sure, so
Oh
I
yeah.
can't speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
But just the pressures from the congregation, the pressure to always be on, the pressure to always be right, the pressure to always come up with. Um, and when I say be on, meaning that in church culture, you always got to be on to the point where, people expect you to have this dynamic sermon all the time. And if you're not like preaching
Mm-hmm.
at this certain level, if you're
Mm-hmm.
not preaching a sermon that, got the people falling out and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
then you're not
Yeah.
good. So
Mm-hmm.
that type of pressure is very heavy, and it's a lot of weight to carry. And if you have not, as a pastor, as a preacher, if you've not um, figured out that you have to do the will of God and not the will of the people, and
Mm.
you're not there
Mm-hmm.
to entertain, that's a lot of weight to carry. It's a
But
lot of
was
weight. So
there any discussion about, hey, we've got to start caring for ourselves so that we can care for our congregations?
I think the conversation evolved into that after that incident, because, like I said, it threw so many people in the church
Mm-hmm.
world for a loop, and that has been the conversation. And that conversation is ongoing. The pandemic actually helped pastors have to figure that out, because you can't go to church. You got to figure out how to preach on Zoom now. You're not
Mm.
going to visit people. So all of those things. So in a lot of ways, the pandemic shifted. It didn't take the weight off, but it shifted some of the pressures. But
Mm-hmm.
now we're back in a place where, we're trying to get church membership up again. That's pressure. Trying to get people to come back. That's pressure. Trying to figure
Mm-hmm.
out how to balance remote and in person. That's pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out the finances of the church, because people aren't tithing anymore. That's pressure. To keep the
Mm-hmm.
lights on at church, to pay the people on church salary.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
weight. And so I think, yeah, the conversation did come out of that. I saw a lot of, clergy members reaching out. Hey, I love you. If you need me, I'm here. Let's
Yeah.
get together. Let's create groups. Let's get together. Let's talk more. We've got to do that. I was talking to someone earlier this week, and I said, clergy always talks about how isolated they feel. And, we always talk about we do this alone. But when people create gatherings, people don't show up because, well, I'm too busy for this. No, we have to make time for this.
Mm-hmm.
We make
Mm-hmm.
time for what's important, and we have to make time for our own mental health and well-being, so that we
Mm-hmm.
can have time to do the other things before we crash and burn.
Mm-hmm. Truth be told, there should be mental health care for uh, pastors and preachers and their families as a
Yeah,
whole, because preachers and pastors spend so much time um, taking care of their congregations that sometimes family is just falling through the cracks. and
absolutely.
and I tell you, we were very resilient as kids, but my dad was gone
Yeah,
a lot, either preaching or visiting the sick, or even with other people around. I mean, we've evolved into this place where, okay, we've got associate pastors and we're going to delegate duties or whatever, but I came up at a time when my dad did it all.
yeah. I did also. I'm a PK and a preacher myself, so
Mhm.
I feel it on both sides. And I know my children, as they were growing up, felt the weight
Yeah.
of me being absent and being there for everybody else all the time. So that's
Mhm.
very real. And there are members of the mental health community who seek out clergy. There are special people that specialize in caring for other clergy, caring for women in ministry, caring for brothers in ministry. There are people who specialize, or whose purpose to make sure that clergy are healthy. So I think it's very important for clergy to connect to those groups, and for those members of the mental health community, working in the mental health community, to make sure that pastors, clergy, men and women have access to their services. That's key.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, it is key. And so,
Mhm.
especially if you're dealing with people, because clergy feel like, and I say that as a member of clergy, we feel like we can't share everything with everybody, because we have to be strong all the time, and we have
Yes.
God and we have faith. Yes, we do, but that does not stop us from having depression or having anxiety or grieving. I did a workshops earlier in the year for clergy to just to address their own grief, because particularly during COVID, they were doing funeral after funeral after funeral after
Mm.
funeral, and
Mhm.
didn't have time to stop between each one to breathe and to process and to reflect and to meditate and to just um, you know deal with their own grief. They're doing grief
Mhm.
funerals for their own family members on top of congregation, and the weight of that, and just dealing with the secondary trauma of that, the vicarious trauma through other people, and the secondary, the post grief PTSD, and all of that is real. And I don't think for a long time we called it what it is, but now we have to
No
call it
doubt.
what it is. Yeah.
No
Now we're
doubt. I
talking
mean,
about what
and
it
you're
is.
making this so real for me right now and talking
Yeah.
about it, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
listen to everybody else's problems. You have to hold on to these
Yeah.
things, right?
Yeah.
You don't get to
Yeah.
go talk about it with someone else. You get to
No.
hold on to your weight and
Hmm.
everybody else's weight.
Hmm. Yeah, I have no shame, and I tell everybody I have a therapist. I meet with her every other Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have absolutely nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have a lot to talk about, but she holds that space for me because I hold that space for so many other people.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we literally just talk practitioner to practitioner, or we talk about the
Mm-hmm.
weather and the sports and the news. And then other
Mm-hmm.
times I'm like, hey, I had a really tough week. My anxiety has been triggered, and this is what I have going on. And we address, we talk about ways that I might need to reframe some things or release some things that I'm
Mm-hmm.
carrying. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's very healthy for me, and I
Yeah.
recommend and encourage people to maybe not go as often as I do, but it's part of my built-in self-care for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
I want to talk about I'm going to call it the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
From a Christian perspective, all I've heard all my life, if you kill yourself, you're automatically going to hell,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's
Yeah,
an automatic. You don't
yeah,
get a do-over, right? So I want to
absolutely.
talk about that when we come back from break. We'll be right back on
Okay.
94.7 FM. I'm Dr. the Doctor in the chat room with Dr. Sarita Wilson Anderson in just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
We are back on 94.7 FM. I am here with Dr. Sarita Wilson Anderson. We're talking about suicide ideation from a faith perspective. Um, One of the things I've always heard is, if you commit suicide, you don't get a do-over.
Mm-hmm.
You are hell bound. Let's address that elephant in the room.
Yeah, and I think that's a question that theologians and Bible scholars and pastors have wrestled with for centuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
there was a person in my place of employment who died by suicide a couple of years ago, and everyone's question was, well, what does that mean for him? Because he was such a good person. Is he going
Mm,
to go to heaven? And, there's a couple of ways to address that, right? One is none of us ever knows the level of suffering and pain anybody else is enduring.
mm-hmm.
We can empathize with people, but we never really know how deeply people are impacted by things they're going through and what they may not say. So that's one thing. So we can't say that it's selfish. We because
Mm,
we don't know that people always want to die. They just don't want to deal with the pain. They don't want to live like they're living anymore, and they can't see a way out. And
yeah.
as Christians, we believe that, and we say that God is the way out. The way is Jesus. And if I am like you. I grew up believing that too. But as I grow older and I mature in my faith and in my relationship with God, it's very relational and it's personal. And we
Mm-hmm.
can't speak for God and we can't judge
Mm-mm.
God. And all we
Mm-hmm.
can do is pray that people, the Bible says, confess with your mouth and believe with your heart. If they
Mm-hmm.
believed and confessed Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, I don't know that dying by suicide is any different than dying by a car accident suddenly. I don't have the answer to that, but it's something we do wrestle with. I have to believe that we serve a God who holds heaven and hell in His hands, and none of us can put
Mm,
anybody in a heaven or hell. I have
mm-hmm.
to believe that I know that people are saved and live their good lives, and God loves and God forgives, and His forgiveness endures
Mm-hmm.
um, beyond what we can do or have the capacity to do. We don't know anybody who's completed suicide. We don't know the conversations they have with God at those last moments. We're never going to be
Mm-hmm.
privy to that. We are
Mm-hmm.
not privy to the relationship with God that they have in their hearts, the soul
Mm-hmm.
searching they may or may not have done before they took that last breath and made those things happen. And so that's a very hard thing to call. So even
Mm-hmm.
my heart always goes out to pastors who have to preach the eulogy of somebody who died by suicide. Because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you say? How do you come up
Yeah.
with something that will comfort those who are still here, their
Mm-hmm.
person's family and speak well of the life that they lived. And I think that's what where I hang my hat with that is um, how much suffering were they doing while they were here, and how did they live life. And I try to hang my hat on they lived a good life. I know for a fact that they love Jesus, and they confess Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, and that God loves, and that they had their own personal relationship, and asked God for whatever they needed in those moments, and God gave them the relief or the peace that they needed. It's such a
Mm-hmm.
hard conversation to have,
Yeah.
such a point that we still really, even in what I do, still really wrestle with. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, ultimately, I believe the message is still love. I believe the message is to, if you see people are suffering or struggling, do all you can to bring them out or to help them come out of that pain, and find pain relief, and to trust God with our spirits and our souls. Because that's the
Mm-hmm.
one thing we can't hold for anybody else is their soul.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So trusting and believing God for that and what God does with that for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
ultimately we want to do what we can to just prevent
Yeah.
anyone from
Yeah.
getting into that mindset, right? I talk
Yeah.
about mindset so much here, and that's what we want to do. Try to create positive mindsets and create safe spaces for people to
Yeah.
not feel like, if I come to you, my business is going to be all over
Yeah.
out in the streets. Create safe places where people don't have to feel like, because I feel this way, I'm weak. You know,
Right.
create safe places where people don't have to feel like, because I feel this way, it makes me less of a Christian.
Yeah.
I love God less than you do. Let's create safe places for people.
And I think you have a very understanding what a safe place is, right? A
Mhm.
safe place is not judgment. I have been around people who've had family members who didn't complete suicide, but who attempted and had suicidal ideation. And the work conversation was, well, that's just selfish. Why would you do that? You got family
Yeah.
that loves you. You got this. You don't know that person's level of pain. You might think
Mhm.
you know from the
Mhm.
outside looking in, but until you can tap into a person's spirit or soul and live their pain, you have no idea internally what they are struggling with and dealing with. None of all of us think we know, and we are privy to, and we get a peep into the lives and spirits of some things, but we never get it
Mhm.
all. And so
Mhm.
it's not a selfish act if you are just trying your best to find peace and find relief. People are not
Mhm.
doing it to be selfish. They're doing it because
Mhm.
they just don't know, they don't see a way out. And
And
our
let's talk
role,
about go I'm
yeah.
sorry, go ahead. Go
No, no,
ahead.
no. I was just going to say our role is to help people see that even in the darkest hours, there's still
Mhm.
light and there's still
Mhm.
purpose. And so people
Mhm.
have to see the Jesus in us, even in our safe spaces. We can't
Mhm.
define for somebody else what a safe space is. We have to be the safe space they need.
Mm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was thinking, the love thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, that's something too that some people haven't learned what it means to love themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're talking about, and so many people love you and care, maybe they don't know how to be receptive to what we call love. They
Right.
haven't even really learned what love is, you
Yeah.
know because for
Yeah.
some people, what you do for them, acts of services, so we'll get into that, love language, it may not even feel like love to them.
Yeah.
They may
Yeah.
not understand. I mean, when you are mentally um struggling and fighting with so many different things, it may not be easy for you to even understand what it means to be loved.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I have learned, as I deal with people, as I meet people, as I encounter people, as I encourage people, that everybody's ability and capacity to embrace love is different. And
It
based on
is.
what people have experienced in their childhood, in their relationships,
Mm-hmm.
that determines where their heart is.
Mm-hmm.
And is as easy as it may be for some of us, is equally as difficult for others. And so when we talk about how Jesus met people where they were, we have to meet people where they are in understanding that they don't have the same capacity that other people may have. Capacity
Mm-hmm.
speaks to resilience, meaning
Mm.
they don't have the same capacity, so they don't have the same resilience. So what may be no big deal to you or I, and we like recover quickly from something that might be
Yes.
changing or life
Yes.
altering or traumatic, for somebody else is extremely different or completely different. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have to, as the church, instead of being so judgmental of, well, they should be over that by now, or they should be past that by now, or they need to
Girl.
stop all that. Instead of being so judgmental, we literally, we as a church have to really learn how to meet people where they are so that we can help them address and understand what real love is, what unconditional love is. As see, this part of the church that bothers me is that we give conditional love even as the church. So when
Ooh.
people come for help, we look
All
at them
right,
like
now
they're
you go
crazy.
preach, girl.
Yeah,
Yes.
we look at them like they're crazy. We don't want to help. We close the door. We turn them away. We don't help. We don't walk them through the steps to get resources. We give them a phone number and say, "Hey, call these people." No, 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 no. That's not helpful. We have to journey with people like
And
Jesus
then get
journeyed.
on the phone. Do you know that so and so
Right,
today was
right,
asking me
right.
for, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like we just got
yes,
no
yes.
mercy whatsoever, but
No,
we
no.
want it. We
And
want
and
it from
and that we want it.
people.
And there's a thing called grace. There's a
Yes.
thing called grace, and we have to be gracious to others as we want
Mm-hmm.
Jesus to be with us. That's the
Mm-hmm.
bottom line.
Um,
Grace and
I want
mercy.
to talk about just a little bit. I want to hit on, and we do this each time we've had this discussion. We talk about some of the common myths about
Mm,
suicide. One of them
yeah.
being the one about talking about it increases the risk.
Hmm.
It does not. If you
It
think
doesn't.
someone wants to harm themselves, it's okay to ask them. Do you feel
Hmm.
like you want to
Hmm.
hurt yourself?
I think we have to ask the hard questions, and most people are uncomfortable asking those questions. But if you want to save
Mm-hmm.
somebody's life, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
be of support and be there for someone, you have to position yourself to ask the hard questions. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can't, connect them with somebody who can, because we have to. It's like saying when you go to the emergency room for something happening to you physically, are you having pain in your chest? Are you having pain in
Mm-hmm.
your head? Are
There
you
you
having
go.
pain here? Are you having pain there? They ask the hard questions to try to find the root or the source of what's going on with you physically. We have to ask the hard questions. Are you having suicidal ideations? Are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you created a plan? We have to ask those questions so we can know where to start with getting them the help that they need. So that
And
is a
you've
myth.
already touched on this one. You know, people who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. We can never take that
Hmm.
risk.
We can never take that risk, and we can't take it lightly. We have to consider every single thing as life altering or life ending and deal with it appropriately. We have to, if you could be doing anything on your computer, but when you hear that, you ought to automatically perk up and say, wait, push pause. Let's have a conversation right here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another myth is suicide cannot be prevented. You know, yes, it's unpredictable, but it can be prevented.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that starts with talking, communication, open and
Absolutely.
safe spaces, listening without judgment, listening without telling people what they should or should not do, but listening. People, a lot of times, people just need, that's why narrative therapy is so important, right? People telling
Mm-hmm.
their stories. Everybody has a story, and we have to
Mm-hmm.
take the time to offer empathetic and active listening.
Mm-hmm.
Not listening to respond, not listening with the next, but listening and communicating. Yeah.
And we've already touched on this one. This is a big one. People that take their lives are cowards, they're weak, and they're selfish.
Not true at
Yeah,
all. Not
not
true. We've
true at
seen really
all.
strong people. If you look at some of the entertainers we've seen
Mm-hmm.
die by suicide, they have this big life and this image, and we have what we romanticize as being the best life, but you never
Mm-hmm.
know what people are dealing with internally. So that is a
Mm-hmm.
myth. That is also a myth. Not
Um,
true at all.
Suicide always occurs without warning. That's a myth too. And I've had people on the show that have had someone close to them
Mm-hmm.
complete suicide,
Mm-hmm.
and all of them have talked about, in retrospect, there were
Mm-hmm.
warning signs.
Yeah. In hindsight, there were some red flags. And so we've got to
Yeah.
be mindful of the red flags. And it can be the slightest behavioral change. But if you notice a
Mm-hmm.
big change in someone's behavior, and it's often hard to detect the signs in people that are closest to you because you see them all the time and you're just
Yeah.
used to what they do from day to day. So it can be very slight, but in incrementally, but build up over time. So we've got to pay attention and
Hmm.
stop ignoring little things because they can become big things if we don't address
And
them.
I want you to dig into the signs and symptoms in just a moment. But one other myth that I wanted to address is that um, therapy and medication don't work. And I think this is important since we're talking from a faith perspective. To me, these are the folks that say you could think you can pray it away.
Hmm.
These are
Yeah,
some of the folks, maybe not all, but some of the
that's
folks
some.
that think you can
And,
pray. Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna say what you said earlier: faith without works is dead. So we do
Mm-hmm.
have faith, and we do have prayer, and we do believe. But God has also given us and equipped us with professionals and professions for a purpose and a reason. We're not afraid to go
Mm-hmm.
to a cardiologist. We're not afraid to go to a gynecologist. We're not afraid to go to an
Mm-hmm.
ophthalmologist. So we
Mm-hmm.
should not be afraid to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a licensed
Mm-hmm.
professional counselor to get the help that we need. We're not afraid to take blood pressure medication. We're not afraid to take cholesterol medication. So we should not be afraid to take anxiety or depression medication. And I think oftentimes, and even with people that I know in my own family, it doesn't work because you don't give it a chance to work. What happens with medications is that you have to take it long enough to allow it to level off in your body. If you take it up
Mm-hmm.
and you take it down, and you take it up and you take it down, you take it today, you don't take it for 2 days, you take it a day, it makes your blood levels spike
It's
and it makes your
not going to
levels
be
in your body spike
beneficial.
and we
Right.
never level off. So you've got to take
Mm-hmm.
it consistently and then you cannot take it or you can't take yourself off of it without the doctor titrating you down and off of it. Otherwise your body does go into different types of reactive responses. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
to take it as prescribed. And if you need to if there's a problem with it, you have to give your physician or your psychologist, your psychiatrist time to address it and titrate it. And
Mm-hmm.
then let them figure out the dosage. And sometimes it is trial and error until they get the right dose, depending on where you are. But you have to
That
give it that
happens with
space.
blood pressure.
What
I
happens with
can
blood
personally
pressure?
speak. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Blood pressure medication, thyroid medication, cholesterol medication. You've got
Mm-hmm.
to take it consistently and let the doctors, the professionals, figure out where you need to be and titrate it to that appropriate level. And there are times where it might, if it does well and you're doing better, you can titrate down. And there are times where it might have to titrate up. And so
Mm-hmm.
just like you said with your blood pressure medication, you start on one dose, you may end up on a different dose, but that's the process, but it all works together. All things, Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of them who are loved and called
Mm-hmm.
according to his purpose. The medication, the prayer, the therapy, they all work in tandem.
Let's talk about signs and symptoms. Kind of dive
Mm,
into that for a moment.
yeah. So I mentioned earlier about just being mindful of little behaviors when people start
Mm-hmm.
to um, isolate, when people
Mm-hmm.
are kind of despondent, no longer care about the things that they once cared about. If people
Mm-hmm.
start to give away possessions or things that have always been meaningful to them, if people start
Mm-hmm.
to talk about, I don't have a purpose, or I don't have a desire for that, or I don't have joy, or you start to hear this, what
Mm-hmm.
we call spiritual distress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual buzzwords: no hope, I'm hopeless, I'm helpless, I'm no good. Those types of schools of thought, those types of words. So it's all of those types of little things that become larger things. If people start to self-harm, start to
Mm-hmm.
create behaviors that is self-harming,
Mm-hmm.
if they start to hang with different people or hang with people that are not healthy for them, if there's an uptake
Mm-hmm.
in drug or alcohol use, if they start look for guns, if you start to see that they've went out and purchased a gun or anything like that, because people use several different methods. If they try to start getting prescriptions for pain medication or start abusing their pain medication, if they're
Mm-hmm.
sleeping too much, if they're not going to
Mm-hmm.
work, all of those
Mm-hmm.
things can be signs. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are planning to die by suicide, but those are warning signs that we cannot ignore.
Those are signs that at least at minimum say
At
that this person is
minimum.
probably depressed and
Mm-hmm.
needs some care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so we have to pay attention to the red flags. Just like in our
Mm-hmm.
relationships, we see red flags coming long before the relationship ends. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got to pay attention to them. Same thing with our mental health. We see the red
Mm-hmm.
flags long before things escalate and become unsurmountable. And we've got to stop avoiding them and deal with them head on.
Before you give, we're kind of at the end. Before you give some final thoughts, I want to mention once more the lifeline, the crisis line, to the audience for people that might be struggling with thoughts.
Sure. There's a new crisis line, helpline, lifeline, and the phone number is simply 988. So you don't even have to. 911 was always easy, but it's sometimes difficult to get through. You have all types of medical emergencies and crises happening in the
Mm-hmm.
city, but 988 is a direct line to get mental health help and support for those who might be having suicidal thoughts or ideation. And so everyone needs to have that number in their phone and in their mind at all times for whenever you encounter someone or for yourself.
Thank you so much
Mhm.
for always being open to coming back and sharing with the audience. Any final thoughts before we go today?
I just want us to remember as a church community, as a faith-based community, as people of faith, that we are not above reproach and we are not above dealing or being having to live with mental health disorders, concerns, or diagnoses ourselves. We're human. We're Christian, but we're human. And so
Mm-hmm.
remember that we are not above help and we are not above any of these things happening to ourselves or to our families. And so to get the appropriate support and help and to be a very good, helpful listening ear and safe space for those who you see or hear might be having
Yeah,
those types of thoughts. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
again, and I want you guys to also remember that you can join me next Saturday, same chat channel, same chat time, right here on Doctor to Doctor in the chat room on 94.7 FM. We will see you then.